The judge's gavel struck the wood once, twice. The echo faded, but the tension in the room only grew. Everyone was waiting. The jury leaned forward, whispering among themselves. The spectators in the gallery sat frozen, barely breathing. The air felt heavy, charged, as if something was about to explode. At the center of it all stood Thomas Hale, the sharp, ruthless lawyer who had built his career on tearing people apart in court. His record was spotless, never a loss, never a challenge he couldn't crush. And today was no different, or so he thought. He adjusted his tie, his confidence unshaken. Across the room, his wealthy clients watched with smug smiles. On the witness stand sat Clint Eastwood, silent, still, unshaken. Hale smirked. He was ready to destroy him. The jury was hooked, waiting for him to strike. He stepped forward and, with a voice filled with mockery, asked, "Mr. Eastwood, do you even understand the case you're testifying for?" A few chuckles rippled through the courtroom, but then Eastwood spoke. One sentence, and everything changed. Hale adjusted his tie and took a slow step forward, confidence radiating from every move. This was his stage and he was the star. "Mr. Eastwood," he began, tilting his head slightly, as if speaking to a fragile old man. "I have to admit, I never expected to see someone of your experience here today." A few quiet chuckles rippled through the jury box. That was all the encouragement he needed. Hale turned to them, flashing a brief smile before shifting his focus back to Eastwood. "Tell me, sir, how long has it been since you've been involved in a case of this complexity?" Eastwood remained still. No reaction, no expression. Hale smirked, pretending to think. "I imagine keeping up with modern financial law must be quite the challenge at your age. So, let's be honest. Do you really understand what's happening here?" Silence. Hale took another step closer. "I mean, fraud? Embezzlement? Corporate crime? That's a far cry from whatever it is you used to do. Maybe in your time, things were simpler, but today's legal world is different. It's faster, more advanced. You can understand why I might question your ability to contribute anything relevant." More chuckles from the jury. Hale turned slightly, pacing for effect. "Of course, I respect your legacy. Truly, I do. But let's face it, law is a game for those who can keep up. And Mr. Eastwood," he let the words hang in the air before delivering the final blow. "Are you sure you still can?" The room waited. Still, Eastwood didn't flinch. No frustration, no hesitation, just that same steady gaze, locked on Hale. Hale raised an eyebrow. Why wasn't he reacting? He glanced at the jury, expecting more laughter, but the amusement had faded. Something was shifting. Then Eastwood finally spoke. And with just a few words, Hale's smirk disappeared. The courtroom held its breath. For the first time since Hale started his cross-examination, the jury wasn't laughing. The smirks, the quiet chuckles, they were gone. Hale noticed, but he didn't care. Not yet. He leaned forward, resting a hand on the witness stand. "Well, Mr. Eastwood?" Nothing to say. Finally, Eastwood moved. He slowly adjusted his posture, his hands still resting on his lap, his expression unchanged. Then, in a low, steady voice, he spoke. "You talk too much." The words were soft, almost casual. But the way he said them, calm, certain, unshaken, made the entire room shift. A few jurors exchanged glances. Hale blinked, caught off guard for just a moment. Then he forced out a chuckle. "Well, that's the point of a courtroom, isn't it? To talk? Or maybe you'd prefer we settle this another way." Eastwood didn't blink. "I'd prefer you knew when to stop." The air changed. Hale's smirk twitched, but he kept his voice light. "And what exactly do you mean by that?" Eastwood exhaled, like a man who had seen this before, 100 times over. "You think you've got this all figured out, don't you?" His voice was steady, deliberate. "You believe the words you say shape reality, that if you talk fast enough, twist the right details, people will believe you, that the truth is just another argument to win." Hale's confidence wavered just for a second. The jury noticed. Eastwood continued, his tone still composed. But here's what you don't understand. Some things don't bend. Some truths don't care how clever you are. Silence. Even the judge, who had been half distracted earlier, was now fully paying attention. Hale straightened his tie, forcing a small laugh. Mr. Eastwood, are you suggesting I don't know what truth is? Eastwood tilted his head slightly. I'm suggesting you wouldn't recognize it if it was staring you in the face. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Hale's jaw tightened. His usual confidence, his control over the room was slipping. But he wasn't done. Not yet. He cleared his throat, smoothing his jacket. All right then, Mr. Eastwood. Since you seem to know so much about truth, why don't you tell us? What exactly do you think is happening here? Eastwood's eyes narrowed slightly. Then he leaned forward and dropped a bombshell. And just like that, the entire trial changed. A hush fell over the courtroom. Something had shifted. Hale, who had been in complete control just moments ago, felt the weight of Eastwood's words settling over the room. The jury, once entertained by his wit, was no longer amused. Eastwood leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed but his presence commanding. He wasn't rattled. He wasn't defensive. He was waiting. Hale cleared his throat, forcing another smirk. That's a bold statement, Mr. Eastwood. Are you suggesting that I, an officer of the court, don't care about the truth? Eastwood met his gaze, unwavering. I'm suggesting you care more about winning than about what's right. The air grew heavier. The smirk on Hale's face twitched, barely holding. He had faced difficult witnesses before, but this was different. Eastwood wasn't arguing. He wasn't flustered. He was exposing. Hale adjusted his tie, pacing slightly. This wasn't going the way he planned. He needed to take back control. Let's not get dramatic, sir, Hale said, forcing his voice to remain light. We're here to discuss facts. The law isn't about feelings. It's about evidence. And, as far as I can tell, you don't have any that contradicts my client's innocence. Eastwood exhaled, shaking his head slightly. That's where you're wrong. A murmur rippled through the jury box. Hale stiffened. He had anticipated an argument, not a revelation. He narrowed his eyes, masking his unease. Care to explain that? Eastwood folded his hands. You assume this case is just about legal technicalities, about who can argue better, who can spin the details the right way. But the truth doesn't need a defense, Mr. Hale. It just needs time. And now that time has come. Silence. The judge leaned forward slightly. Even the court reporter had paused for a moment, sensing the tension. Hale forced a chuckle, though it sounded more nervous than confident. That's a nice sentiment, but let's get back to reality. This is a court of law. If you're suggesting there's more to this case than we've seen, then I suggest you prove it. Eastwood's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. You want proof? Fine. Let's talk about what's been hidden. The jury sat up. The judge arched a brow. Hale, for the first time in his career, felt something he never expected in a courtroom. Doubt. And Eastwood wasn't finished. The room felt different now. No more laughter. No more arrogance. The jury, the judge, even the spectators, all waiting. Hale tried to shake off the unease creeping into his chest. He squared his shoulders, forcing a smirk. All right, Mr. Eastwood. You say there's more to this case. Let's hear it. Eastwood didn't hesitate. Your clients didn't just commit fraud. They had help. Hale's expression stiffened. Excuse me? Eastwood leaned forward slightly. This wasn't just about stealing money. It was about covering it up. And the people who helped? Some of them are sitting in this very room. A ripple of murmurs spread through the jury box. Hale scoffed, shaking his head. That's a strong accusation. But you have no evidence. That's where you're wrong. Eastwood reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folder. The courtroom froze. Eastwood held it up, his eyes locked onto the judge. Inside this file is proof, documents, transactions, emails. Evidence that not only ties these men to corporate fraud but shows exactly who helped them bury it. The judge sat up straighter. You're claiming you have direct proof of a cover-up? Eastwood nodded. I'm claiming I have enough to open an entirely new investigation. The murmurs turned into full whispers. The courtroom was buzzing now. Hale's jaw clenched. His usual charm wasn't working. He needed to regain control. "Your Honor," Hale said quickly, his voice sharper now, "this is outrageous. The prosecution never disclosed this so-called evidence. It's a stunt, a distraction." The judge turned to Eastwood. "Mr. Eastwood, where did you get this information?" Eastwood exhaled. "From someone who got tired of being part of the lie." The jury shifted uncomfortably. The judge motioned for the bailiff. "Bring that file forward. Now." Hale's stomach tightened. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. The bailiff took the file and placed it in front of the judge. The courtroom was dead silent. The judge flipped it open. His eyes scanned the pages, and then his expression changed. He looked up, his voice steady but firm. "We need to pause this trial immediately. This evidence demands further investigation." The entire courtroom erupted, and for the first time Thomas Hale felt real fear. The courtroom erupted. Whispers, shocked expressions, the shuffle of papers. Everything was falling apart. Judge Davenport tapped his gavel sharply. "Order. This trial is now in recess until this evidence is fully examined." Hale shot up from his seat. "Your Honor, this is completely out of line. We haven't verified if—" The judge cut him off with a sharp glance. "Then we will verify it. Court is adjourned until further notice." It was over, for now. The moment the judge stood, the room descended into chaos. Reporters in the gallery scrambled for their phones. The jury, once engaged but controlled, now muttered among themselves, some shaking their heads, others watching Hale closely. Hale turned to his clients. They were panicking. Richard Lyle, the CEO, grabbed Hale's wrist. "What the hell is this?" he hissed. "You said this was locked down. You said we'd win." Hale yanked his arm free, lowering his voice. "Shut up and let me think. He had to fix this. Fast." He turned, scanning the room. Where was Eastwood? Then he saw him, still sitting at the witness stand. Calm, unbothered, not celebrating, not reacting, just waiting. Hale's stomach twisted. This wasn't luck. This wasn't coincidence. Eastwood had planned this. Hale stormed past the crowd, his mind racing. He needed answers. He needed control. But for the first time in his career, he had neither. The courtroom wasn't the same when everyone returned. The excitement, the whispers, the energy, it had shifted. The jury no longer looked entertained. The spectators weren't waiting for a clever argument. They were waiting for the truth. Judge Davenport entered, his expression unreadable. He took his seat, adjusting his glasses before clearing his throat. The room fell silent. "I have reviewed the evidence submitted earlier," he said, his voice firm, unwavering. "And after careful consideration, I have determined that it is not only relevant, it is critical to the integrity of this case." Hale gritted his teeth. He knew what was coming next. "I am ordering an immediate, independent review of the financial records related to this trial," the judge continued. "Any attempts to conceal or manipulate information will be met with severe legal consequences." A ripple of shock spread through the courtroom. Hale shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is a blatant overreach. The prosecution didn't present this evidence before trial, and now you're allowing them to derail the case with last-minute accusations." The judge turned his sharp gaze toward him. "Mr. Hale, are you suggesting I ignore potential fraud simply because it wasn't convenient for your timeline?" Hale's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The jury watched him closely. They weren't on his side anymore. Judge Davenport continued. "This trial will not proceed until the investigation is complete. We are talking about possible corruption, one that may extend far beyond the defendants sitting at that table." Hale's face paled. For the first time, he felt something he wasn't used to, fear. And across the room, Eastwood just sat there, watching. Hale stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He had one chance left. "Your Honor," he began, his voice sharper now, urgency creeping in. "This entire trial has been compromised. The introduction of last-minute evidence is unfair and prejudicial. I move for an immediate dismissal. The courtroom stirred. Whispers, frowns, a few skeptical glances from the jury. Judge Davenport didn't react. He simply folded his hands and stared. On what grounds, Mr. Hale? Hale clenched his jaw. Think. Find the angle. This so-called evidence, he said, gesturing toward the file, was never disclosed before trial. It's an ambush, a stunt designed to sway the jury with drama, not facts. Silence. Then Eastwood spoke. No, Mr. Hale, he said, his voice calm, measured. It's called the truth. The jury sat up. Hale turned toward him, his smirk returning. But this time, it was forced. Oh, is that right? You think dropping a folder full of papers makes you some kind of hero? Eastwood tilted his head slightly. No, but it makes you nervous. Hale's fists tightened. The judge exhaled, tapping his gavel once for order. Mr. Hale, let's be clear. Are you saying this evidence is false? Hale hesitated. He couldn't say that. If he did, and the investigation proved otherwise, he was finished. I'm saying it's misleading, he countered. This court shouldn't allow evidence that hasn't been properly vetted. The judge arched an eyebrow. That's exactly what we're doing. Checkmate. The ruling was swift. Motion to dismiss is denied. The investigation will continue. Hale sank into his chair. His grip on this case, on his career, was slipping. Across the room, Eastwood just watched. Silent, steady, because he knew Hale wasn't done falling yet. The courtroom felt different now. No more clever arguments, no more smirks, just silence. Judge Davenport set the folder down, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke. Based on the investigation's findings, I am ordering an immediate review of not only the defendant's financial records, but also the legal conduct of their representation. Hale's breath caught. The judge's gaze landed on him. Mr. Hale, if it is determined that you knowingly defended fraudulent activity, you will be held accountable. A sharp murmur spread through the jury. They weren't looking at him as a lawyer anymore. They were looking at him as a man on trial. Hale clenched his jaw. Your Honor, Save it, the judge interrupted. His voice was final. Across the room, his clients, the powerful executives who once sat so confidently, were now shifting uncomfortably. One whispered to another. Another reached for his phone. The realization hit Hale like a punch to the chest. They weren't worried about him. They were cutting their losses. He was alone. Hale's hands trembled as he straightened his tie, but nothing could fix this now. Then Eastwood stood. No words, no final insult, just one long, steady look. And then he turned and walked away. Hale sat there, frozen. He had mocked a man he thought was beneath him. Instead, that man had destroyed him. The courtroom doors slammed shut, but the echoes of what had happened inside rippled far beyond those walls. Hale sat frozen, his hands clenched into fists. It was over. His clients, once untouchable executives, were led away in handcuffs. Their wealth, their power, their influence, none of it could save them now. And Hale? His name was everywhere. Headlines screamed about his downfall. News anchors dissected his every move. The once feared lawyer had become a cautionary tale. The legal system, his playground, had turned on him. The same courts he had manipulated now saw him as the villain. When the jury finally returned, the verdict was swift and brutal. Guilty. Hale barely reacted. He had seen it coming long before they said the words. Across the room, Eastwood stood. No celebration, no victory speech, just a long, knowing glance. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. Out of the courtroom, out of the chaos, out of Hale's life forever. And for the first time, Hale understood. This wasn't just about winning or losing. This was justice. The game was over. And Hale? He had played himself. The end. Hale had spent his life believing he was untouchable. That no matter how many lies he twisted, how many loopholes he exploited, he would always come out on top. But in the end, the truth caught up to him. It didn't happen in an instant. It didn't come in a dramatic outburst. It came in silence, in the weight of evidence, in the quiet realization that no argument, no clever trick, could save him now. Justice doesn't always come fast, but it comes. For years, Hale had convinced himself that winning was all that mattered, that the system was just a game, and he was the one pulling the strings. But the system doesn't forget, and it never forgives. No one is invincible. No one escapes forever. Hale had mocked the wrong man. He had laughed at the truth. And in the end, the joke was on him. Because when the dust settled and the courtroom emptied, Hale was left with nothing. No career, no power, no reputation, only the harsh reality that he had destroyed himself. The truth had won, and it always does. What do you think? Did justice truly win in the end? Hale believed he was above the law, untouchable. But in the end, his arrogance led to his fall. Have you ever seen someone abuse power, thinking they'd never be caught? Did they get what they deserved, or did they escape? Let us know in the comments. We want to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoy stories that expose the truth, the consequences, and the fight for justice, make sure to subscribe. Because in the end, no one outruns the truth forever.